I was in the middle of making dinner when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a video call from my younger brother. I almost didn't pick up. We weren't exactly close, not anymore, but something made me tap the green button. Maybe habit. Maybe the part of me that still hoped things were different than they were. He didn't say anything. The screen showed the ceiling of my mom's living room, that same water-stained ceiling I'd stared at 100 times growing up. And then I heard voices, my mom's voice first, then my aunt's, then my brother himself, talking like he had no idea he'd called me. I stood there with a spatula in my hand and listened. "She's covering the whole thing?" my aunt said. "All of it? Every month?" That was my brother, like clockwork. Direct deposit, first of the month. And she hasn't said anything about it? About how much? Not once. He laughed. The sound of it landed somewhere in my chest and just sat there. "She feels guilty. She always has. You know how she is." I set the spatula down very quietly. I didn't want them to hear any sound from my end. I didn't know why. Maybe I already understood somewhere underneath everything that I needed to keep listening. My mom spoke next. "The lease renews in March. The landlord's going up $250. Does she know that? Not yet." My mom's voice was so even, so calm, like she was discussing the weather. "I'm going to tell her it's $350. She won't check. She never does." The kitchen felt very small suddenly. I was aware of the sound of the pan on the stove, water starting to simmer, and I reached over and turned the burner off without thinking. "And if she pushes back?" my aunt asked. "She won't." My mum said it like she knew me better than I knew myself. And the worst part, the part I've spent a lot of time sitting with since, is that she wasn't entirely wrong. I had never pushed back, not once in 4 years. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense without context. My name is Sloane. I'm 31 years old. I'm a project coordinator at a logistics company, and I have been since I was 26. When I got my first real job after a very difficult stretch that included 2 years of community college, a transfer, a degree I wasn't sure I could finish, and the kind of early 20s financial mess that a lot of people know about but don't talk about in polite company. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the oldest of 3 kids. My brother Kieran is 4 years younger than me. My sister Noelle is 7 years younger. My dad left when I was 12. Not dramatically, not violently, just quietly one day the way some men do. And my mom raised us mostly on her own after that, working dispatch for a trucking company, stretching every dollar until it was nearly translucent. I watched that growing up. I watched her count change at the grocery store. I watched her choose between the electric bill and the water bill. I swore to myself that when I had money, I would make sure she never had to do that again. The problem with promises you make to yourself at 12 is that you don't always account for the person you're making the promise on behalf of. When I got my job at 26 and my salary finally felt like something real, not just covering my rent and ramen, but actually real, I started sending money home. 100 here, 200 there. It felt good. It felt like something. Then my mom called me in the spring my second year to say she was struggling. The apartment she'd rented for years had gone up. She'd had some medical bills. Kieran was living with her and working part-time. Noelle was finishing high school. Could I help cover rent for a few months? I said yes. A few months became a year. A year became 2. The dollar amount crept up in small increments that each individually seemed reasonable. An extra 50 for the electric in summer, another 100 when Kieran's hours got cut, a little more when my mum said her back was giving her trouble and she'd missed some shifts. By the time I was 30, I was covering their entire monthly rent, $1,400, plus the electric and gas bills, plus Noelle's phone plan, plus whatever my mum called me about in a given month, which was usually somewhere between 50 and 200 more on top of everything else. I was sending home close to $2,000 a month. My take-home after taxes was about $4,400. I lived in a studio apartment 45 minutes from my office because it was what I could afford. I drove a 2014 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it. I had a small emergency fund and a 401k I was barely contributing to. And I told myself this was all fine. This was temporary. This would change when I got my next raise. I told myself a lot of things. What I didn't tell myself What I refused to think about very directly was that Kieran was 27 years old and healthy and had no dependents, and that he had never once offered to cover any portion of the rent he was living under. Or that Noel had graduated high school, started at a community college, then dropped out, and was also living in that apartment, also not working, also not contributing anything. Or that my mom's back, while genuinely painful, I'm sure, had not prevented her from taking a part-time job at a garden center that she'd mentioned to me once, casually, in the middle of a conversation about something else. I knew all of this. I just didn't let myself look at it directly. Because looking at it directly would have required me to do something about it. So I stood in my kitchen holding a spatula while my brother talked about me like I was a vending machine, and my mom planned how to skim an extra $100 of an already fictional rent increase. And my aunt laughed at something I didn't quite catch. And I stood there and I thought, how long has it been like this? And the honest answer, the one I didn't want to look at, was probably from the beginning. My brother hung up eventually, still without realizing what he'd done, and my phone screen went dark, and I stood there in my kitchen for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that, not because crying would have been wrong, but because people always assume I cried, and I didn't. I felt something, but it wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you've been holding a heavy bag for so long that you stop noticing the weight, and then someone points it out, and suddenly your arm is absolutely screaming. I had been carrying this for 4 years, and they had been watching me carry it and thinking about how to add more. I didn't call my mom back that night. I didn't call Kieran. I made myself finish cooking. I ate dinner. I watched something on TV that I can't remember now, and I went to bed. And I started thinking. The rent was due on the 1st of the month. This was the 22nd. I had 9 days. For the first 3 days, I did nothing except think. I went to work, I came home, I did normal things. But I was running calculations in my head, constantly, the way you do when something has knocked your sense of reality a little sideways and you're trying to find firm ground. 4 years. Roughly $23,000 in rent payments. Probably another 8 to 10,000 in utilities and phone bills and the various extras my mom asked for. Conservatively, I had sent my family somewhere in the neighborhood of $32,000 over 4 years. That was a down payment on a house. That was a car, paid in cash. That was the fully funded emergency fund I didn't have. I wasn't angry about the money itself, exactly. I want to be fair here. Some of that money genuinely helped people who needed it. Noel had been 17 when I started. My mom had been struggling. I don't regret every dollar. What I minded was the conversation I'd overheard. The planning. The calculation. The certainty in my mom's voice when she said she won't check, she never does. The fact that they'd had this conversation. That it had apparently been this kind of conversation before. And nobody had ever thought to just ask me. To say, hey, we know this is a lot. Are you okay? To say thank you in a way that wasn't immediately followed by, can you do a little more? On the 4th day, I called a friend of mine, Audra, who I've known since college. She's one of those people who gives you the truth without the softening, which is mostly what I needed. I told her everything. The call, the conversation, the numbers, all of it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I said. "Do you want my opinion?" "Yeah." "Stop," she said. "Just stop, not as a punishment, not to make a point. Stop because you have been pouring into a bucket with a hole in it and calling it helping." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. The thing about going cold turkey on support you've been providing for 4 years is that it has real consequences for real people. I knew that. My mom's rent was real, her bills were real. Noel and Kieran were actually living there and they would actually be affected. But I also knew, and this was the harder thing to hold on to, that I had been the one preventing any of them from having to figure it out. My constant presence as a financial backstop meant they never had to look at their situation and ask, what are we going to do about this? Because the answer had always been, Sloane will handle it. And Sloane was tired. On the 7th day, I made a decision. I was not going to call my mom and have the confrontation. Not yet. Not like that. Because I knew what would happen. She'd cry. She'd make me feel guilty. She'd tell me I didn't understand how hard things were. And I'd end up sending the money anyway. Probably apologizing for bringing it up. That's how it had always gone when I'd tried to raise anything even vaguely resembling a concern. Instead, I was going to simply not send the money. The first of the month came. I woke up, made coffee, went to work. My mom's rent transfer didn't go out. Kieran's electric share didn't go out. Noella's phone payment didn't go out. My phone stayed quiet for 3 days, which surprised me a little. I'd expected something sooner. On the fourth, my mum called. Hi, sweetheart. She sounded careful, like she already knew something was different but wasn't going to name it first. Hey, Mom. I was just checking in. How are you doing? I'm good, I said. Work's been busy. A pause. I noticed the rent hasn't come through yet. Yeah, I said. I note. Another pause. Longer this time. Is everything okay? Did something happen with your account? And this was the moment. I thought about it for days, what I would say, how I would say it. I didn't want to be cruel. I didn't want to blow everything up just to blow it up, but I also wasn't going to pretend. Nothing's wrong with my account, I said. I've been doing some thinking about the arrangement, and I need to take a step back from it. Silence. Take a step back, she repeated. I've been covering the Lenten bills for 4 years, I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. It's been a lot, and I don't think it's been working the way I thought it was, for any of us. Sloane. Her voice shifted. I knew this voice. It was the one designed to make me feel small, a little guilty, a little like I was being unreasonable. We depend on that. I know, I said, and I think that's actually the problem. She started to say something about the rent being due, about Kieran not making enough, about how this wasn't a good time, and I let her finish. And then I said, I know this is hard to hear on short notice. I should have said something sooner, and I'm sorry for that. But I can't keep doing this. I told her I loved her. I told her I wasn't disappearing, and I got off the phone before she could pull me into the argument she was clearly loading up for. Kieran called the next day. His opening line was, What are you doing? Not how are you, not is everything okay, not even a hello. What are you doing? Making some changes, I said. You can't just stop, he said. That's not how this works. How what works? He paused. The arrangement. I almost laughed. The arrangement. Like we'd all sat down and negotiated this. Like it was a contract I was breaching. I've been covering rent for an apartment I don't live in, I said. For 4 years, I think I can stop. He pushed back. He brought up my mom's health. He brought up how hard things had been. And I let him make his case. And when he was done, I said, I know it's been hard, but I think it's time for you and Mom and Noel to figure out the next steps together. I can't keep doing it for you. He hung up. He didn't say goodbye. My aunt called 2 days later, which told me everything about how those conversations were happening on their end. She was softer than Kieran, more strategic. She talked about how much my mom had sacrificed, how family takes care of family, how she knew I understood that. I do understand it, I said. I've been doing it for 4 years. She didn't have much to say to that. Noelle was the last one to reach out, and her message caught me off guard. She sent a text, not a call. It said, I don't really know what's happening, but I'm sorry if things got weird. I got a job at Target, started last week. I stared at that for a long time. All I could think was, she found a job in a week. The moment the floor shifted even slightly, she found a way to stand on it. She had been capable of this the whole time. She'd just never needed to be. I texted back, I'm proud of you. That's a real step, I mean that. She sent back a little heart emoji and nothing else. Here's what I want to say about the aftermath, because I know it's the part people are most curious about. My mom and I did eventually have a real conversation, about 3 weeks after I stopped the payments. It was hard. She said things that hurt. I said things that I'd been holding on to for a long time. She told me I was being selfish, and I told her I'd been anything but selfish for 4 years and that this was what it looked like when I finally started. She didn't like that. But she also didn't lose the apartment. Kieran picked up more hours. My mum talked to her landlord and worked something out. Noelle contributed from her Target paychecks. It wasn't comfortable for them, I know that, but they managed. They did what people do when they have to. Kieran and I still don't talk much. That might be the part that hurts the longest. Not my mom, not even the money, but the brother I thought I had. The one who might have said something different in that phone call, who might have noticed I was stretched thin and said something about it. That person apparently doesn't exist in exactly the way I'd hoped. My mom and I are in a different place now. Careful. There's love there, I think. But it's different than it was, and I don't think it goes back to what it was, and I'm trying to make peace with that. What I did with the $2,000 a month I got back, I maxed out my 401k contributions. I started a high yield savings account and I set up automatic transfers the moment my direct deposit hits. I paid off my car. I signed up for a financial planning consultation and sat across from someone who looked at my numbers and said, with some adjustments, you could be in a position to buy in 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years! I stood in my kitchen recently, different apartment now, still small, still mine. And I thought about that night with the spatula and the video call and the water-stained ceiling, and I thought about how close I came to just quietly wiring $350 that wasn't owed to anyone, and never knowing. A butt dial. A $9 pocket in a pair of jeans. Sometimes that's all it takes for everything to become clear. I'm not the ATM anymore. I'm just Sloane. And Sloane is finally starting to have enough. I think about Noelle a lot. Not the version of her who was living rent-free and not working. The version who sent me that text. I got a job at Target. Started last week. 7 words. And the thing is, she did it in a week. 1 week after the floor shifted, she found her footing. That tells me everything I needed to know about what my constant help had actually been doing all those years. There's a version of generosity that looks like love but functions like a ceiling. I kept showing up with money, and in doing so, I kept my family from ever having to ask themselves what they were actually capable of. That's not a comfortable thing to admit. It means some of what I called helping was really just avoiding the harder, more honest thing, which was saying, I can't keep doing this, and you need to figure it out. What I had to learn, slowly and kind of painfully, is that doing the right thing isn't always the same as doing the comfortable thing. For 4 years, I paid because it felt wrong not to. But integrity isn't about feeling good in the moment. It's about being honest with yourself even when honesty costs something. I wasn't being honest. I was being afraid. Afraid of being the one who said no. Afraid of what that made me. And that fear cost me $32,000 and a lot of sleep. The path that required real intelligence. And I don't mean book smarts, I mean the slower, harder kind of clear thinking was recognizing that I had information I'd been refusing to use. I knew Kieran was able-bodied and underemployed. I knew Noella had been out of school for over a year. I knew my mom had taken a part-time job she'd mentioned almost in passing. I had all of that. I just hadn't let myself add it up, because adding it up would have required me to act on it. The clearest thinking I did in this whole situation was sitting down after that phone call and actually doing the math. Not emotionally, just practically. What am I sending? What do I have left? What does this actually look like? That math changed everything. And then there was the part that required something closer to stubbornness. When my brother called and said, "What are you doing?" When my mom's voice went carefully cold. When my aunt started in on the family takes care of family speech, I had to hold the line. Not because I stopped loving them, but because I had finally decided that taking care of myself was not a betrayal. That was the hardest thing to believe. It still is, some days. Sloane is finally starting to have enough. That sentence took me 4 years to be able to mean. I think the cost of avoiding hard conversations is always higher than the conversation itself. And I think the people in your life who truly want good things for you will eventually respect you more for having limits than for having none. I'm still working on believing that fully, but I'm getting there.